I know about the World Health Organization. It's the UN agency. China basically runs it through their boss, Dr. Tedros. I call him doctor with little asterisks because he's not a medical doctor. Imagine being the boss of the World Health Organization and not actually being a medical doctor. Um, so basically, countries around the world have delegates there. So, and this was the first meeting of the delegates, and I presume the pandemic was on the forefront of their mind. That's all my guess is. You were there. Tell me what it was actually like.
That's right. I mean, the amount of topics and information that they cover over 3 solid days of conferences. And then in addition to the main program event, which sees countless amounts of conferences happening every day, many of them at the same time each day. So there's a big overlap there, but there's the keynote speakers, then there's the sort of side speeches that happen or side conferences, and then there's also an additional a number of side events. So for any one person to cover this conference in its entirety would be next to impossible. I'm really glad that we had 3 journalists on the ground there and 2 videographers, but even that, you could never make it into each one of these conferences, and each one are about an hour and a half in length. And that's to say if they don't go over, which I find that typically they do. So the basis of this particular summit, and I have the booklet here that they were handing out, which, I mean, if we want to talk about climate change and saving the trees. They had hundreds of these books on the tables that they were giving away, has all the program outline, the speakers, and the various topics. Huge components here, of course, are the digitization of health, the food security, energy, and future pandemic response, so that pandemic preparedness plan. But one thing that I noticed that was really interesting, and this is another separate printout that they had, again, hundreds of these, is this little magazine here. So it's called Health, A Political Choice, and it's also about investing in health for all. So there was a huge financial component in this particular summit. Research and development, big pharma, Moderna, Pfizer, they played a key role in many of these conferences. And again, as you've mentioned before, Ezra, a vast majority of the speakers are unelected, random bureaucrats or lobbyists or sales representatives that come together, and it's really an opportunity for them to rub shoulders with one another. So this isn't so much necessarily about the conferences themselves that take place with the delegated and designated speakers, but rather the mingling opportunities that happen in between. And so when we first arrived, we recognized that the security was very intense, but there was some wiggle room there. So there were several protests that took place throughout the duration of the 3 days. Prior to the kickoff of the events, there was some individuals protesting Tedros specifically, and some claims against him in regards to some ethnic genocide and ethnic cleansing that he's being accused of by the Tigray people. And then there was just other individuals protesting the World Health Organization as a whole. And those protests took place very small numbers every day. But on the first day, the kickoff of the World Health Summit, there was a far left radical group that infiltrated the front of Hotel Berlin, and they protested. I would say there was approximately 30 to 40, maybe 50 at the very most individuals. And so they glued themselves to both the windows of the entrance and the pavement out front. They swiftly glued posters and various information posters onto also the windows of the hotel. And at least one protester infiltrated the building and pulled the fire alarm on 3 separate occasions until they were finally able to locate this individual, and a bunch of them were subsequently arrested. So after that took place, the security became much more tightened up, and there was a heavy police presence, German police, and a lot more strict monitoring of the building itself. So we knew that it would be difficult to get into the summit, but we didn't want to just watch from the sidelines. Previously I'd covered the World Health Assembly that took place in the spring of this year, and all I could do was watch the live streams digitally from afar. And they say some very outlandish things that were noteworthy to report on. However, being in there, so we were finally able to get inside the building and be very stealth in our presence there. And that was only made possible by booking a room at this swanky Hotel Berlin for hundreds of dollars just for the one night. And because of that reservation, we were able to come into the building and truly be and mingle in like the top 1%. It was an extremely exhilarating experience, and no one was any wiser to our presence there.
You said so many interesting things. The first thing is that when you said there were protesters, for 1 second, I thought, oh, maybe it's people who were protesting the lockdowns. Maybe it's people who were protesting the forced vaccines. But no, it was just some rent-a-mob climate change activists. Is that what you're saying? Like, it wasn't even exactly on point with that's crazy. Although there were, as you say, that those ethnic people who claimed that Tedros committed racial atrocities in his home country. That's very interesting that they were there too.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I think it's important to note about these protesters is that they basically stated that the World Health Organization and this World Health Summit was not discussing climate change, and that if they had access to the program, which anyone can access online through the World Health Summit website, they do discuss climate change quite in depth. And there are many conferences that are centered around the topic of climate change. And one thing that they don't discuss, however, which is where I started to ask some questions to both some of the attendees and some people outside before we were kicked off the property on the third day, is why they aren't discussing the harms that the policies that the World Health Organization has instituted and put the hammer down onto their member states with, why those failed policy pandemic response plans aren't being discussed at all. No one seems to be discussing the harms caused by lockdowns, the harms done to children by masking them indiscriminately, and the increasingly alarming scale of excess deaths we're seeing on a global scale.
What you just saw was an excerpt from my nightly show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every weekday I do a monologue. Usually it's about half an hour. Then I interview an interesting guest, and then we read my hate mail or my fan mail, whichever is more fun. It's only available behind a paywall, though. That's how we pay our bills here at Rebel News. We don't take a dime from Justin Trudeau. But the good news is it's only $8 a month, about half the price of Netflix. And in addition to my nightly show, you also get weekly shows from 4 other friends here at Rebel News. So you're getting 36 shows a month just for $8. I think it's worth it. And even if you're not quite sure, do it anyways, because we rely on viewers like you to keep us free and independent. I promise you I'll never take a dime from Trudeau. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com and click subscribe. Thanks.